it is time to go over the Dressed in Daydreams Uniquely Creative Card Making Kit. This is for November 2025. So in your kit, you will have this pamphlet, which has the 6 cards that we will create, and they are at 100% their actual size. The cards for November are square, and in your kit, you will also receive a Uniquely Creative Square Cards and Envelope pack. There is 10 cards in here. You will have 4 cards left, and depending on each month, as I mentioned, there might be bonus cards. Otherwise, you will have plenty of extra card stock and decorations, ephemera, ribbon, and gems to make your own cards with the 4 remaining cards. Additionally, you will receive a full 6x6 Dressed in Daydreams paper pad. There's 32 single-sided pattern papers. And every kit also receives one of these die cut apart sentiments. I will be using the die cut. So Uniquely Creative has die cuts for some of their cut apart sheets. I have some of the dies, and to make it easier, I use the dies to cut these out. So I'll do a video on how to line this up. Otherwise, you can use your paper trimmer and cut your strips as desired. This kit also comes with some black rhinestone embellishments from Uniquely Creative and the Creative Cuts. This has both sentiments and florals and other ephemera images. There's some clocks. I think there's a tag and a couple other things. This is a gorgeous set. I absolutely love it. So you get that. And then lastly, you will receive some ribbon. Sometimes the ribbon varies by package, but all the packages I received at the store have the white ribbon. As I mentioned earlier, I will be using the Cut Apart Essential number 5 die to cut the sentiment strips that are included in the kit. And it just makes it easier to cut. It's a one and done. But if you don't have this die and it's not necessary, it's just a nice option to have, you can use your paper trimmer and cut the strips. If you are using the die and the cut apart, there is a registration mark printed on your cut apart that you will line up your die. I would just recommend you make sure that your sentiments look like they line up with the die as well, just to make sure. I don't know how accurate the registration marks are. So far, I haven't had an issue, but it's always something that you should probably check, especially since you only have one of these. So once you have that lined up, you're going to run it right through your die machine. And I did use repositionable tape on this. It's not always necessary, but my plates are a little warped, and I find the paper sometimes moves around when it's warped, more so than when they're flat. I'm just going to carefully remove my sentiments, and they look fabulous. So these are ready to go. One other awesome thing about these sentiment strips is we will not be using all of them. You're going to have extras, which you can add to other cards. And because of their size, they're really great to just tuck in. You can also use them on art journaling and tags as well. All right, we're going to start making cards. I am going to start at the top left and work my way down to the bottom right. So this will be card 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right, the first order of business is cutting the cards down to 5 by 5. So we're going to take 6 cards, and you're going to cut these down to 5 by 5. They are currently packaged at 5 and 5/16. So we're going to take 5/16 off and square them off. What you're going to want to do is take your paper trimmer, and with the top fold at the top, you're going to take your left edge and line that flush with your 5-inch mark on your paper trimmer and carefully trim down. Then you're going to rotate it 90 degrees so that the top fold is on the left and the open part of your card is on the right. And you're going to measure that edge, the top fold edge, flush with the 5-inch and cut down. Now you have your 5x5 card. You're going to want to do that for 6 of the cards. And that is so that when we start measuring all of these pieces, they are the right measurements for your card. Otherwise, if we leave it larger, these measurements are for all this cardstock will not be accurate, and you're going to have to scale. Let's get ready to make card number 1. The first thing you want to do is trim the black and white striped pattern paper down to 4 3/4 by 4 3/4. The easiest way to do that is to take 5/8 of an inch off of each of the sides. So take 5/8 off one side, rotate it 90 degrees, take 5/8 off that side, and vice versa. This way you end up with your stripes being even all around the panel. If you end up taking the whole total of the measurement off of one side, you're going to end up with your stripes not looking even on the left and right where they're open. While I was recording the video, I couldn't figure out the measurements in my head, so I ended up taking 1/4 of an inch off all 4 sides and then rotating it, and then kept trimming it down by either 1/4 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch until I got my 4 3/4. But you only need to take the 5/8 off of all 4 sides. So take the 5/8 off, rotate 5/8, rotate 5/8, and then you will have your perfect square that is 4 3/4 that will mat very nicely on your 5x5 card base. The next step that I do is optional. I ended up discarding the strips, and I sprayed that background panel with some of the shimmer spray I keep in my stash. You can also use the thermal web glitter dust or any other type of iridescent clear shimmer spray if you want to add a little extra to that background panel. Then set it aside to dry, and once that's dry, we'll pick up with assembling the card. All right, once your spray is dry, if you use it, you're going to go ahead, you can glue this to your card base. And I'm going to use my tape runner. Now I have my pieces, and at this point I'm going to layer them onto the card following the image here. All right, this is roughly what the card is going to look like once it comes together. One other tip that might help you is if you take a picture of your card before you glue it down, so that way you have a better idea of how you want your pieces. I do that from time to time. And then another thing that you can do if you want is if you have cling wrap, you can, or the press and seal, you can press and seal this down and then turn it over and then glue the pieces layer by layer by the back. I typically put my pieces down like this. And the other thing I am going to use a lot of is my tape runner. And I'm going to use my tape runner because it's going to allow me time to move my pieces so I can get them exactly how I want them on my card. So I'm going to start with this back rose. And I'm actually going to clip this off because I don't need it and I might want it for something else. During this step, I am still adding some of the detail embellishments for that first layer, and then I add the butterfly. I try to maneuver the wings so they're coming up, they look more lifelike, and then I add a little bit of adhesive right behind his body, the center part of the butterfly, and then I usually take some very thin strips of foam adhesive and put it under the wings close to the center of that body to help prop the wings up. Then I take my sentiment and I added the banners to the banner flags, or the flag banner notches to the ends. However, I wasn't happy with them. I cut it too short, so I grabbed the second sentiment strip and trimmed off less this time and was very happy with the second one around. I'm not throwing the first one away. I will use that on another project, so I'm keeping that. At this point, I'm just situating all the flowers, the leaves, and the sentiment and butterfly the way I want it on the card. I keep moving things around. This is one of the reasons why I do recommend the tape runner. And then the other thing that you want to make note of is how many layers of foam you actually put on the flowers, because you may need to double or triple the foam that goes behind the sentiment so that the sentiment lays nice and flush on your card. Once you have all your ephemera and sentiment and everything glued to the card, the next is just to add some detail, embellishments, and bling. I did use the black rhinestones included in the kit, and I, for the most part, went exactly as the sample and put the 3 right down the center of the butterfly's body. And then I did add some stickles to the butterfly wings, both of them, and centers of the flowers. I set it aside to dry, and the card is all done. Card 1 is done. On to number 2. Next up, card number 2. Card number 2 is this one. So for now, I'm going to be working with the pamphlet open. This card is actually pretty easy, and you're going to want these 2 pieces of paper, and then these are the elements that I believe are in the sample. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take a note. If you pay attention, you can see the clock here, and then you're going to see these flowers here. They are these pieces here. And so when you figure out your measurement, when you cut this piece, which I think has ended up, I measured 3 3/4 by 3 3/4, you are going to want to make sure that this is your 3 3/4. So you're going to cut 3 3/4 here. So that way we have this real pretty piece included in our kit, and then our card, excuse me. And then this piece I actually believe is used in another card. So that's a great way to use up your scraps. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to cut is this piece of pattern paper, and that is this background here. And that measures 4 1/4 by 4 1/4. So I'm going to take my paper and measure at 4 1/4. And remember, our card bases are trimmed down to 5 by 5. So I have my 4 1/4 by 4 1/4. And then this piece here, you're going to want to trim by 3 3/4 by 3 3/4. So you're going to want to take the left and have the left edge flush at 3 3/4 and cut down, and then rotate 90 degrees so that the clock is at the bottom, and you're going to put the left edge at 3 3/4. And now we have our piece. As I mentioned, I believe this piece is used in another card, so don't throw your scraps away just yet. Once you have your pattern paper cut, you grab your card base, and then I typically try and just do a quick rundown of where everything is going to go to make sure that I have everything that I need. And I'll just loosely place the items where they go. And I'm going to spray the card base and this top layer with iridescent glitter spray, and then I will make my bow. I added the glitter spray to the panels. You can barely see it in the camera, but it's a real light dusting of iridescent glitter spray. I'm going to set those aside to dry and then start working on the next part of the card. It's time to start assembling the card. I'm going to start by adding this first pattern paper layer. I start with adding that first layer to the card, centering it on the card base. And then I'm going to add the floral decorated square centered on that panel I just added. But I'm adding foam tape. This takes me a little bit of time, so I'm going to fast forward because I foam tape the entire backside of that panel. So I've added the double-sided foam tape behind this panel. I'm going to mat that right on to my card, and then I will start adding the embellishments. I'm adding dimension to the leaves as best as I can by kind of folding them in half a little bit where the main vein would be on the leaves, and then curling them up a little bit and then gluing them down. And you're going to see I switch between tape runner, glue, adhesive. It just depends on the area of the focal point and what I'm trying to do. Some areas I want popped up, some I don't. Again, on this, if you are going to double up on areas of the foam tape, you need to take that in consideration for the top layer, which is usually the sentiment, because you might need to add double or triple foam behind the sentiment so that it lays flush and it's supported on your card. It's time to add the sentiment, and I realized that the sentiment was going to be somewhat covering the center of the flowers, which is where I had planned on putting stickles. So I went ahead and added the stickles first and then added the sentiment. Please note the stickles is an added embellishment and completely optional. However, you can also use shimmer pen or some other kind of shimmer or sparkle if you wish to give it a little extra pop to your final card. Time to make the bow. I think I skipped this step earlier, and I just made a small little bow and trimmed it up and added it to the card. You can attach your bow to the card with either a glue dot or glue. It's personal preference. I attached this bow with glue, and then later on in, I think, card number 6, I used my tape runner. So you can use whatever you want. Next, it's on to adding the final touch, which is the gems. And for the most part, I stuck to the sample, but I did add a couple extra little ones for some extra bling. You might want to wait to do that until you're done so that you make sure you have all the sizes that you want for all of the cards that are in the kit. We are making progress. Finished card number 2, and now we're getting ready to go to card number 3. Great. We are moving on to card number 3. And this first step that I'm showing you is completely optional. It depends on how much paper you want to use, but I use both the 6x6 papers with the clock for the one card. I used one of the clock 6x6 pages for the base card, and then with the second 6x6 sheet, I cut the clock out of that paper and use that as a second layer to add dimension. And I just trimmed right around the very edge of that clock. After I'm done trimming the clock, I just put it on top of the base clock to make sure I've trimmed it the way I want it. Once that's set, I then start prepping the back by adding the double-sided foam adhesive to the back of the layer I'm going to pop up, and then I set it aside. It's time to start trimming the 6x6 panels to the right size. The first panel I trim is the one that has like a peachy tone to it. That needs to be trimmed to 4 3/4 by 4 3/4. This part of cutting is a little tricky because you want that clock in the center. The best way to do this is cut 1 5/16 off of the right, and then on the left, you're going to trim approximately 3/8. What you should end up with is a panel that is 4 1/4. You might need to trim 1/16 of an inch off of either the right or the left, and then you're going to trim the top and the bottom. From the bottom, you're going to trim 1 1/2 inches. From the top, you're going to trim approximately 1/4 of an inch. For the clock layer, I sprayed with the liquid shimmer spray and then topped it off with some of the Thermoweb iridescent glitter dust. Wonderful. My panels are dry. I have all my pieces ready, and now it's time to start assembling the card. I'm taking that peach panel and centering that on the card base. Next, I'm adhering the decorative clock cardstock centered on that decorative panel. Now I'm adding that cutout clock that I went ahead and decided to add as an extra. I'm adding that to the center of the clock that's on the decorated card base. Remember, I did use foam adhesive behind that clock layer as well. When I cut the clock layer out, I also cut one of the flowers that was on the top right. Here is where I'm using that piece and popping it up just to give some extra dimension. And then I continue adding on the remaining ephemera, the florals, the butterfly, adding shape to the leaves again and the butterfly, and using foam dimension here and there where I feel comfortable putting it. Some of this stuff is super delicate, so I am very cautious of where I use that. Next, I add stickles to some of the centers on the flowers and a little bit on the body of the butterfly and a little bit on some of the centers of the flowers on the sentiment. Now it's time to wrap up the card and add that final touch with the adhesive back gems. I pretty much followed the sample. I might have added a couple more here and there. I always like to add a little extra. Voila, card number 3 is done, and you are halfway to completing the card kit. Moving on to card number 4. For this card, you're going to want the 2 tickets from your 6x6 fussy cut sheet. There's 2 sheets, but you will only need 1 to complete all the cards for this kit. Some of the fussy cut items on that 6x6 sheet will be used in card number 6, so make sure you set those aside and carefully cut around those 2 tickets. And then you're going to see where I ink the edges of those tickets a little bit with some frayed burlap. That is completely optional. In addition to adding some ink around the edges of the tickets, I also added a little bit of ink around the black die cut clock. Time to start trimming the couple pieces of cardstock. So the black polka dot on the white background cardstock, you're going to trim that to 4 3/4 by 4 3/4. Now it's time to trim the second sheet of paper. So you want your paper upright. You will have the left edge at 3 7/8, and then you're going to rotate the paper at 90 degrees so that the flowers are on the left side. You want the floral part or the left edge at 4 1/4, making a 3 7/8 by 4 1/4 panel. Now it's time to make the flag banner at the bottom of that second piece of cardstock that you just cut. I used a ruler and I turned the cardstock towards the work surface and worked on the back, which is white. And I used a pen. You can use a pencil. It's up to you. I made a little tick mark at 1 15/16. And then I drew straight lines from that center point down to the right corner and down to the left corner, and then cut along those lines to get my banner made. For the next couple of steps, I adhered the black polka dot paper to the center of the card base, and then I inked around the edge of that flag banner I made with a little bit of frayed burlap just to give a little extra dimension because that panel was fairly light and it was going on the white background. I wanted to give a little bit more dimension. And then I popped up that banner piece, and you'll see me add the foam tape, and then I'll add that to the card. I centered the flag layer on the black polka dot paper. Now we're on to adding all the fun detailed pieces. I did use tape runner for the majority of the pieces so that it gave me some time to move things around. I eyeballed most of it, and you're going to see with one of the tickets, the ticket to the right, I put a little bit of foam tape just towards the back top of it. It gives it some extra dimension, and it doesn't have that ticket lay so flat. And then I did add 3D foam tape behind some of the flowers and the sentiment for some more dimension. I shaped some of the leaves with my fingers as well to give them a little more dimension so that they didn't look so flat on the card as well. I did make a little banner notch on the right of the strip I used for my sentiment, and I did trim about a quarter of an inch off of the left flush so that it looks exactly like the sample. The final touches are adding the gems and the butterfly, and I added the butterfly by kind of creasing it up so it V's in the center where the body is, and then adding a little bit of glue just where the body is and some really thin pieces of foam tape behind the wings to kind of prop them up so they have a little bit more dimension. This is exciting. Card number 4 is done. Congrats. And I wanted to point out that I use that insert pamphlet that comes with the card kit throughout the entire time I assemble the cards. It's very handy and a great resource to use. Congratulations on completing card number 4. It's time to roll into card number 5. And I love how they cut a little bit of the front card panel and gave it a little bit of a different variety than your regular card. We are going to do one more trim to your already trimmed down 5x5 card, and that is to cut 2 inches off of one of the openings of the card. And the way I did this was I put the 10-inch at the top ruler of my paper trimmer, and I lined the score line at the 3-inch mark, and I cut down, and that removes 2 inches of the card base. Now we're going to start cutting our pattern paper. The first sheet of pattern paper we're going to cut is the one with the homes at the bottom. So with the homes at the bottom at the top ruler, you want the left edge to be at 4 7/8, and then you're going to trim. Then you're going to rotate the paper at 90 degrees and have the homes, which will be the left edge, at 4 7/8. So you will end up with a 4 7/8 by 4 7/8 piece of paper with the homes at the bottom intact. Next, we're going to cut the mushroom paper. So with the mushrooms at the top of the ruler, so the paper will be upside down, you want the left edge flush at 2 7/8. Then you're going to rotate the paper 90 degrees so that the mushrooms are on the left edge, and you want that edge, the left edge, to be at the 4 7/8 mark of the trimmer. So you will end up with a panel that is 2 7/8 by 4 7/8. Next, you can adhere the larger 4 7/8 by 4 7/8 to the inside of your card base, and then the smaller panel will go on that outside cover panel. Time to start adding the embellishments and sentiment. I did use the sentiment strip that they used in the sample, and you're just going to cut that into 4 little pieces, separating each word, and I popped each of those up. I also popped up the cute little angelic doll, and I popped up the fox off of the angelic doll. So the fox has a little bit thicker foam adhesive behind it. And then the pink flower that is to the right, I used foam dots and the black, one of the black gems in the center. And then on the inside, I added one of the floral clusters to the like mid top of that panel. So there's a little surprise when you open it up. We are flying through these cards. Card number 5 is done, and now we're on to the 6th card. Time for a little bit of fussy cutting. The 6x6 sheet that you used in card number 4, you're going to want that for this card. And you will need the like blush or pink clock, the 2 yellow wings, and the doll. You're going to fussy cut all of those items out, and then we'll start working on the rest of the card. It took me about 7 minutes to cut those pieces out. Now they're all ready. I do edge some of the pieces with the frayed burlap ink. I did the wings and the clock. The clock is going to get cut in half because you're going to put half on the top right and the other half on the bottom left. The tape runner is going to be your best friend for this card because there is going to be a lot of moving parts and it might take some finagling to get everything just right. After I've inked my pieces, I start adding the wings to the back of the doll. I used a little bit of tape runner for that, and I placed the wings where I wanted them, and then I set her aside. Next, I'm going to cut the base layer, and that is going to be 4 7/8 by 4 7/8. For the banner that goes through the center, you can use the leftover piece that you used in a previous card, and I had made note of it in that card. If you kept that piece, you can use that. You're going to want to cut it down to 2 inches by 4 1/4. If you want to curl that right top edge over on that banner, you can. Otherwise, you can omit it. I found it easy to curl it when I used my tip of my paper piercer. The next thing I do is adhere that first layer of pattern paper to the center of the card base. Now I really start working at curving that top right corner. You see I'm using my paper piercer, and then I will make my flag notches at the bottom the same way I did it on one of the previous cards. I used the pencil and the pen and a ruler. I'm cutting the clock in half. If you want, you can look at the sample and see what numbers were sticking over to the right if you want it exactly the same. That's how I made mine. And then you're going to use the one portion on the top right and one portion on the top left. And now you're going to see where I just kind of start putting the pieces together. And I did use tape runner. I recommend using the tape runner because I moved these pieces around quite a bit so that I can make sure they were exactly where I wanted them. If you want your card to be exactly like the sample, you will also need to cut that flower piece in half as you saw me do here in the picture. And I just turned the flower so that it matched up with the one in the brochure and then cut it in half. And now I'll start building all those layers and using foam tape where I want for dimension. I use 3D foam tape behind the banner slash flag to pop it up and give the card extra dimension. I made a small little bow with the ribbon, and this card I attached the bow with my tape runner. My tape runner is pretty heavy and sticky, and I felt comfortable using it. So that's how I attached the ribbon to my card. I don't know if you caught it, but I also used a different sentiment for this card. I used the birthday wishes instead of the one that was on the sample. And you have a large variety and assortment of sentiments to use for all the cards in your kit. The bow is the last detail that you should have had to add to your card. Your 6 cards should now be complete. Congratulations, everyone. Hopefully all 6 cards are done and that you're super happy with the outcome of your cards. I hope you found the YouTube tutorial helpful. A couple of things I wanted to address that happened during the assembly of the cards. I did use some stickles on the first 3 cards. I did not use stickles on the last 3 cards. I wanted to show you the difference between some cards with a little bit of extra supply that maybe you have in your stash versus cards that are made straight from the kit. If you have extra supplies like some shimmer or the glitter glue or some kind of paste, or you want to add some kind of stenciling in the background, I really think you should go for it and explore and experiment with all your products. As you saw, there is a ton of product left over. I will have a bonus card for the Zoom meeting. And if you are watching the YouTube tutorial prior to the Zoom meeting and you have any questions, save those questions. We'll address them in the Zoom meeting, and hopefully I can help you work out any other issues or answer any questions that you had. I really love these cards, and I think they are absolutely beautiful. I hope you love them too. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you in the Zoom. Happy crafting.